The committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the committee at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled An Overview of the Budget Proposal for the National Institutes of Standard and Technology for the fiscal year 2024. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Good morning again. Today's hearing will focus on the National Institute of Standards and Technology budget proposal for the fiscal year 2024, and I would like to welcome the Honorable Dr. Lucascio to the committee for her first hearing and also thank her for taking the time to participate. I look forward to hearing your testimony. This committee often emphasizes the science in the CHIPS and Science, but today we have the opportunity to examine both. The CHIPS and Science Act provided $50 billion in federal funding for the Department of Commerce to strengthen the U.S. position in semiconductor research, development, and manufacturing. NIST is home to the CHIPS Program Office and is responsible for overseeing how this funding is allocated and sent out the door. The $50 billion is quite the bump for an agency whose budget usually hasn't been even $1 billion 5 years ago. Today's hearing will give us insights into NIST work implementing CHIPS and Science, as well as the overview of NIST's broader contributions to America's competitiveness. The CHIPS and Science Act also authorized critical research and investments at NIST to address key threats to U.S. competitiveness and innovation. The NIST for the Future Act, which was included in CHIPS and Science, codified NIST's role in several areas including bioengineering, advanced communications, cybersecurity, international standards setting, just to name a few examples. NIST is one of our nation's oldest physical science laboratories. In 1901, Congress established the agency to support U.S. industrial competitiveness by improving measurements of infrastructure, which at the time were lagging behind the capacities of other nations. Fast forward 122 years, and NIST is doing just that, working as industry's laboratory to advance U.S. leadership in measurement science, standards, and technology to ensure the U.S. remain a global leader and does not lose its competitive edge. NIST measurements support the smallest of technologies to the largest and most complex, from computer chips to global communications networks, from nanoscale devices to earthquake-resistant buildings. An endless number of products and services rely upon NIST's technologies, measurements, and standards in some way, shape, or form. As technologies rapidly develop and evolve, NIST research and development continues to play a critical role in the U.S. national security, trade, and innovation. Prioritizing key research areas such as quantum information sciences and microelectronics, advanced manufacturing, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence is growing more important every day as these technologies become increasingly necessary for technological development. Last year, NIST released the AI Risk Management Framework, a set of guidelines required by the National AI Initiative, a bill by this committee, and I would like to commend NIST for the transparent, bottom-up approach it used to develop this framework, which ensures these voluntary guidance is useful to the broad community of AI stakeholders. This framework, the subsequent establishment of the Trustworthy and Responsible AI Resource Center, and the research and development NIST conducts on AI-enabled systems are going to prove critical to our work to stay on the cutting edge of reliable and trustworthy AI technologies. This work is essentially important now as this technology is growing by leaps and bounds. I'm looking forward to seeing how organizations begin to adopt this voluntary guidance and hearing more about NIST's plans to support the safe development and adoption of this emerging technology. NIST also works with small and medium-sized manufacturers to compete in the global marketplace through the Hollings Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program and Manufacturing USA Network. Through these programs, NIST helps U.S. manufacturers adopt new technologies and methods to overcome obstacles facing advanced manufacturers. NIST also works to ensure domestic supply chains are secure, resilient, and trustworthy. Promoting supply chain innovations will enable U.S. manufacturers to improve their efficiency, identify supply chain disruptions and quality issues, and bolster national and economic security. I look forward to hearing more about how public-private partnerships at NIST are promoting innovation in advanced manufacturing capacities and supply chain management. I also hope to hear about what progress EMP has made in establishing the National Supply Chain Database authorized in CHIPS and Science. It's quite a lot of ground to cover, but we in Congress have the responsibility to ensure that every taxpayer dollar is spent as effectively and as efficiently as possible. I hope we can use today's hearing to do just that. Again, I thank our witness for being here, and I look forward to your testimony. I now recognize the ranking member for her opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Lucas, and for today's hearing. And thank you, Dr. Lucascio, for being here. It's really wonderful to see you again. NIST is, as we know, a small agency in the Department of Commerce, but you play a large role in promoting U.S. Innovation and competitiveness by advancing our measurement science standards and technology. NIST actually does critical work in every sector of the economy. The American public may not know that, but we all do. From supporting small manufacturers, looking at domestic supply chains, creation of engineering standards and building codes to make our buildings safe. NIST develops cybersecurity guidelines for the federal agencies and businesses alike to protect America's information. Congress and industry alike are asking NIST to take on more responsibility even as the agency faces a crisis of failing infrastructure and unmet maintenance needs. And really, it's never exciting to focus on maintenance, but if you don't, you end up with a big bill to rebuild at the end. So the report from the National Academies in February of this year found that the deficiencies in facilities constitute a major threat to the mission and performance and therefore our nation's economy and national security. So with leaking roofs and exploding pipes, ruining millions of dollars worth of equipment, poor ventilation systems, making it impossible for NIST to conduct certain experiments. Routine requests for maintenance have had to be deferred for years. This has been a problem decades in the making, and I think this committee, although we don't do the appropriations, needs to focus and advocate for addressing this need to be met if you are going to continue to provide the essential services that you do. I also want to just touch very quickly on the framework that you have provided at the request of Congress on AI systems. I have a worry that as the voluntary guidelines that you produced in a very fine process may be actually not fast enough to keep up with industry. It's just roaring ahead in ways that faster than any of us expected. And so while NIST is not a regulatory agency and there are limits to our discussion about that, we need to look to NIST for your deep technical expertise in informing debates about policy. As the chairman has mentioned, NIST plays a key role in CHIPS for America program. This is very important for our country, and as we invest in chips manufacturing to solve a vulnerability for our country, I want to make sure that we are also addressing the safety of workers in those plants. I come from Silicon Valley, and in years past, there were issues of individual workers and even neighbors of fabs being exposed to toxic chemicals that created huge cancer, miscarriages, fetal abnormalities. Industry has moved way past that, much improved from that, but I do think we need to pay attention to toxicity, and you look at EPA, who really are the gold standard on exposure to these chemicals, to make sure that we don't end up with a new set of problems, and really challenge industry to make sure that if there is a toxic chemical that cannot be replaced with another, that the protections for workers and neighbors are gold standard EPA. I'm happy that President Biden has continued his commitment to science and manufacturing as reflected in his fiscal year budget request for NIST. I look forward to hearing your testimony today to learn about how we can tackle some of the major challenges that we face and also to ensure U.S. competitiveness in advanced industries. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The chair thanks the gentlelady for her thoughtful observations as always. Let me introduce our witness today. Our witness today is the Honorable Dr. Laura Lucascio, Undersecretary of Commerce for Standards and Technology, Director of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. She oversees NIST's collaborative efforts with industry, academia, and other government agencies to develop and apply the technology, measurements, and standards needed for innovative products and services. Dr. Lucascio most recently served as Vice President for Research at the University of Maryland, College Park, and the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Prior to joining the University of Maryland, the doctor worked at NIST for 31 years, rising from a research biomedical engineer to eventually leading the agency's material measurements laboratory. She also served as an acting associate director for laboratory programs, providing direction and operational guidance for NIST lab research programs. Dr. Lucascio has a BS in chemistry from James Madison University, an MS in bioengineering from the University of Utah, and a PhD in toxicology from the University of Maryland, Baltimore. I recognize Dr. Lucascio for 5 minutes to present her testimony.
Chair Lucas, Ranking Member Lofgren, and members of the committee, I'm Laura Lucascio, Undersecretary of Commerce for Standards and Technology and the Director of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the President's fiscal year 2024 budget request for NIST. The President's budget request positions NIST to revitalize U.S. manufacturing across multiple sectors and in all states, fuel the innovation economy through investments in critical and emerging technologies, and assert NIST's premier position as the national metrology institute in the world, helping our industries to compete and thrive in the global economy. The President's budget requests approximately $1.6 billion for NIST in FY24. This will allow NIST to advance U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness, as is our mission. Importantly, the budget requests critical new resources that are essential to address the serious deterioration of NIST's 70-year-old facilities and to ensure that we will be able to continue to carry out our mission and conduct our world-class research. The FY24 budget requests $995 million for scientific and technical research services account, and that includes $68.7 million in new research program investments. This budget will ensure that NIST remains in a strong leadership position for delivering the measurements and the standards necessary for the development and use of critical and emerging technologies like AI and quantum and biotechnology. It is essential that we remain in a strong leadership position as these technologies are major drivers of economic growth. The budget will expand NIST's efforts to further the development of trustworthy AI systems. Building off NIST's successful AI risk management framework, the budget will provide new resources to expand the capabilities for benchmarking and evaluation of AI systems to ensure that the U.S. can lead in AI innovation while ensuring that we responsibly address the risks of this rapidly developing technology. The budget will also expand NIST's ability to address emergent cybersecurity issues and efforts in cybersecurity education and workforce development. The budget request will also allow NIST to make critical investments to strengthen NIST's core mission delivery, and that includes new investments to accelerate the rapid deployment of critical reference materials to support the bioeconomy and food safety, as well as dedicated funding to more efficiently execute NIST responsibilities for building failure investigations. The FY24 request includes $262.1 million for construction. On both campuses, NIST facilities are degrading rapidly. NIST contracted with the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine to assess our facilities, and their report published early this year describes a dire situation. Quote, that facilities issues are preventing NIST from achieving its mission, and that in many cases, NIST facilities are no longer world-class, end quote. Now, for NIST to continue leading the world in measurements and standards and to continue having the most talented staff to carry out its many activities that ensure U.S. economic growth and national security, we must address the condition of our facilities through sustained investment. The FY24 budget request includes $374.9 million for industrial technology services. This is an increase of $161.2 million to ensure that the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program and Manufacturing USA can address the most pressing challenges facing our nation's manufacturing ecosystem. This increase would allow MEP to narrow the workforce gap, mitigate supply chain vulnerabilities, and leverage advanced technologies for manufacturers. The Manufacturing USA funds will allow for the creation and operation of test beds at existing institutes and support engagement of underserved communities in the network's technology workforce development programs. So I'm proud of the work that NIST does and truly, truly honored to lead professionals that work at NIST. Their efforts aligned with the President's budget will allow NIST to have continued impact on advancing the frontiers of critical technologies that will accelerate and drive future innovation and increase the competitiveness of U.S. industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lucascio, for your testimony. I want to recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Dr. Lucascio, in January, the chairman of the Government and Oversight Committee, James Comer, and I sent a letter to the White House raising concerns about the discrepancies between the White House's blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights and NIST's AI Risk Management Framework. In response to the letter, the White House stated that NIST staff also provided input into OSTP's development of the blueprint. To what extent did OSTP consult NIST about the blueprint? And did you express concerns about the inconsistencies between the two documents?
Thank you for that question, Chairman. So we were involved in the AI blueprint out of the OSTP. We had many discussions all along the way about the compatibility of the two documents, and we have made a crosswalk that you can see on our website that shows the compatibility of the two documents. I will say that they are both geared toward responsible AI. The NIST document very clearly is looking toward measurements and standards and solutions for AI risk management, allowing people to really evaluate their risk associated with the use of AI. And so that document is, I think, a very different document than the AI blueprint, but there is compatibility, and I'm happy to send you our crosswalk on that.
On Friday, the administration announced new actions to promote responsible AI innovation that protects Americans' rights and safety. Specifically, it stated that the Office of Management and Budget will be releasing draft policy guidance on the use of AI systems by the U.S. government. Given the technical expertise at NIST, will NIST be involved in the process of developing this guidance?
Yes, we will. They've already reached out to us, and we will be involved in that.
Is OMB looking to utilize the AI risk management framework?
I am not sure of the answer to that question. But we have worked across the administration, and the administration is very supportive of the AI RMF, and so it definitely will come into the conversation.
Doctor, moving to the CHIPS program, the first notice of funding opportunity for the incentive program to build semiconductor fabrication facilities was released in March. There were several non-statutory policies included in the notice, including a requirement that any entity that receives an award will have to provide child care for everyone involved in the construction and operation of a new facility. One of the goals of the CHIPS program is to offset the fact that building and running fabs in the U.S. is more expensive than in Asia. This requirement seems likely that it will only increase the cost of a project. Will the construction and operation of new child care facilities be considered an eligible use of the CHIPS incentive funds?
Thank you for that question. The CHIPS funds are to be used for creating new manufacturing fabrication facilities in this country. And our goal, according to the law, is really to make sure that that happens and that we have the appropriate workforce to support that. So the money will be used to bring back manufacturing to the United States holistically. And yes, the money will focus on fabrication facilities for leading edge, mature node, and current generation semiconductor fabrication.
To take this question one step farther, has the department solicited an independent cost benefit or needs analysis of making CHIPS award funding available for child care facilities?
No, we have not.
So then it's hard to say what we would expect the return on that investment to be.
But the money, excuse me, may I respond?
Please.
Thank you. And I appreciate the question. We are focused on the success of CHIPS for this country and bringing back manufacturing. That is our sole focus, to make sure that we accomplish everything that you wanted us to accomplish in that bill, which is to ensure that manufacturing comes back to the United States, and we are wholly competitive that way.
I appreciate that very much, Director, and I would just simply note, if all of these incidental issues were going to be added in, then that funding should have been discussed when the bill was put together. But we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. With that, I yield back the balance of my time and turn to the ranking member for 5 minutes questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Part of this challenge we face in implementing CHIPS in science is workforce. My reaction when I saw the child care incentive, not requirement, was that that was to address workforce. I mean, if fab workers don't have the capacity for child care, they can't come to work. And we're already seeing that throughout Silicon Valley. But that doesn't address some other issues relative to the higher end PhDs. I mean, Intel said they needed 1,000 PhDs for their company alone. I don't know if you've done an assessment of how we are going to meet the workforce needs that would be essential to make CHIPS in science actually work.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We have done quite a lot of work in assessing the workforce needs, working with many associations who have put together their discussions about what the workforce needs are going to be. Some of the estimates based on the success of the implementation of the CHIPS Act are that there will be 180,000 new jobs created in this country. That's quite a bit of demand, and we have to fill that gap. And so there are a number of ways we're thinking about approaching that.
Let me ask you about another potential incentive. I mentioned in my opening statement the issue of toxics in the production of chips. At one time in Silicon Valley, there was a huge problem. There were cancer spirals around some fabs, miscarriages that were clearly related to exposures, as well as children who had deformities related to the exposure. There's been improvement, tremendous improvement since that time, but there are still very dangerous toxics. In some cases, they can't be replaced in the production. And I want to know and hear from you publicly whether you're in a position to incent industry to address that issue successfully. If there's a toxic that cannot be replaced, that we work with hopefully the EPA to make sure that exposure is precluded, not just for the workforce, but also for the surrounding community. Would you intend to work with EPA on that?
So I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for that question, and that there are, in the original NOFO, in the first NOFO that came out on February 28th, there are requirements for complying with OSHA. We also, as NIST, we work very closely with our regulators in producing the standards that are required for any new measurement that they need in the field regarding toxic exposures. And so, for instance, we are working right now on the development of standards to measure PFAS.
If I could interrupt, the OSHA director himself said that their standards were insufficient. So I'm hoping that we can reach out to EPA for the gold standard on some of these chemicals.
We'd be happy to talk more about that, follow up with you.
Finally, I want to talk about standard essential patents. You know, this is a very important provision. Patent holders participate in standardization. They declare their patents essential, but they have to voluntarily commit to licensing their patents on fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms. This is really essential for the development of industry in the United States. I'm happy that NIST has moved to retract what I thought was a misguided 2019 SEP licensing policy statement, but I think there might be more work to do to push back on SEP licensing abuse. Are you planning a further action to make sure that the United States policy is to ensure a balanced approach to SEPs and licensing to reward innovative ideas?
So thank you for that question. Yeah, we believe in a balanced approach, and with the withdrawal, I worked very closely with Kathy Vidal over at USPTO on the withdrawal, and of course with DOJ, and we are continuing to have constant communications around SEP licensing and how important that is for our innovation ecosystem. So yes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see my time has expired, so I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Lucascio, do you concur with the National Security Agency that the Chinese Communist Party is co-opting international standards?
Well, I appreciate that question. I've paid a lot of attention to this issue, and China is present in much more prominently in the international standards organizations at this particular time, and they have really laid down the gauntlet when they set forth their China Standards 2035 strategy a few years ago that really said their intent is to be the global gold standard, right, usurping other nations. So with that intent in mind, they have increased participation. We still have more leadership positions than China, but they now have more participants in many different fora. I will say that internationally, with our like-minded partners and allies, we have many more leadership positions than China does on the international standard stage. That's not to say it's not something we should, it's not to say we can't worry about it. It's time to do something, and that's why the National Standard Strategy that was released for critical and emerging technologies that was released last week, I think is so vitally important. We have to be strategic in how we are dealing with international standards. It's absolutely essential.
Thank you. Does the National Institute of Standards and Technology track and respond to the Chinese Communist Party generated standards that become globally adopted?
We do not track that, but I'm happy to discuss that as a follow-on if you'd like.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would you explain the use or explain to us the dangers of allowing the Chinese Communist Party to outpace the United States development standards for artificial intelligence?
I think that is an excellent question, and it is truly existential when you think about who is going to be the leader in creating the next standards on the world stage for AI. I mean, do we want autocratic societies to be instilling their values in what is the global gold standard in AI? I don't think so. I think we want the United States and like-minded partners to take a leadership role in making sure that our values are instilled in AI global standards so that they represent responsible use of AI in consideration of all the risks.
Yeah, and you wonder who you can trust. And, you know, is their AI smarter than our AI domestically, politically, militarily? How is China's state-led approach to technology development challenging the rules, norms, and approaches that the United States and international standards bodies take with regard to standards development?
Well, so one of the things that this new national strategy that was released is really going to have an impact in is coming together with like-minded partners and allies to make sure that the rules remain the same, that we continue to have fair and open and transparent processes, that the governance is retained, which has allowed us to have an incredible and productive international standards arena for decades and decades that has really benefited American markets. So our goal moving forward is to make sure that does not change, that we still are able to operate under the continued, the way we've continued for decades, fairly, responsibly, and openly.
Yeah. What is your agency's perspective on China's use of standards as a tool for protection, technology transfer, and a mechanism for restricting market access?
Thank you for that question. And I think as long as they are still present at the international standards, in the international standards arenas and bodies, coming together to negotiate on international standards, they will not be building barriers to international trade. It's really important, though, that in standard setting bodies, we have an open and fair playing field, so that we can come together and negotiate in the best possible technical standards for the world, win. And if that's true and they're there as part of the negotiation, then that does not become a technical barrier to trade. However, if they become more isolated and mostly adopt internal standards and do not any longer participate in international standard setting processes, then we have the threat of really bifurcating the world and having more technical barriers to trade.
Thank you. I see my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back.
Thank
The
you.
chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Welcome to the committee, Dr. Lucascio. Good to see you. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, launched the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program back in the late 1980s to support small and mid-sized manufacturers and declining industries. The Oregon Manufacturing Extension Partnership, or OMEP, serves Oregon manufacturers statewide and helps them compete globally by creating and implementing business strategies, increasing operational efficiencies, and solving workforce challenges. We appreciate OMEP. So NIST's FY24 budget includes an increase of a little more than $100 million for the Hollings Manufacturing Extension Partnership to make progress on 3 specific goals: narrowing the workforce gap, mitigating supply chain vulnerabilities, and leveraging technology. So how will the proposed increase and addressing these interconnected challenges benefit Oregon and OMEP, and how will this investment strengthen U.S. manufacturing across the country?
Well, thank you for that question, and I appreciate your support of MEP. We think it's a very influential and exciting program, and we're excited about the future of it as well. I think during during the COVID pandemic, one of the things that we really emphasized is the ability to pivot and develop new technologies under when there is a national emergency. That was, I think, a really exciting thing that happened during COVID with the MEP, but also this idea of this supply chain connectedness, right? Starting to really understand what the supply chains are, what the vulnerabilities are. To us, moving forward with this new budget, we will work more closely with the MEP centers on assessing out and understanding the supply chain and the supply chain vulnerabilities regionally, but connect that through the network. So we know what we have at stake at the nationwide, and how somebody in Oregon can help out somebody in Virginia to essentially meet their needs.
Thank you. Moving on to chips and science, which I'm very excited about. The legislation appropriates $11 billion for semiconductor research and development to carry out several activities, including the National Semiconductor Technology Center, the NSTC, to conduct research, prototyping, and scaling of advanced semiconductor technology. My home state of Oregon is home to a thriving semiconductor industry. We have many of the world's leading semiconductor manufacturers, suppliers, and researchers operating in the state, as well as a robust semiconductor workforce, making it an ideal location for the NSTC headquarters or an institute, such as one, for example, focused on advanced lithography. So what will the process look like to select the headquarters and site the network of institutes? Will the NSTC issue RFPs for each, and what role will NIST have in that process? And if you could also address, with Oregon's skilled workforce, advanced and innovative technology, and a sincere commitment to the semiconductor industry, do you agree that Oregon should be a front runner in the designation of the headquarters or a core technical center?
Well, thank you for that question. We are very excited about the NSTC, and we are anticipating that it will be a nationwide resource and really promoting innovation in microelectronics for years and decades to come. And that's really what we need to accomplish here. So the NSTC, we put out a vision and white paper, strategy paper last week. And that is essentially we are right now calling for nominations for people who will participate in a selection committee that will establish the board. The board will then set up the operation for the NSTC. Now, we are not going to be involved in site selection necessarily, but our goal is to have a successful, independent, purpose-built NSTC, and it will take advantage of assets, the most important assets that we have around the country, and be able to link them together.
Tremendous potential.
Tremendous
obviously.
potential. Thank you.
So your budget includes an additional $20 million for cybersecurity. No doubt important, but only an additional $5 million for AI, which is within another technology group. So in light of the recent revelations and conversations and alarm bells in the industry, what message does that send?
Well, I appreciate that question as well. Our AI resources are going to be very, very tightly focused on several things. One, advancing the AI RMF, which has been already adopted by industry. We had an open, as was discussed, an open and transparent process, collected feedback from so many people as we were developing it, and that really transitioned it nicely into being adopted, which is fantastic. There is a lot of conversation about generative AI right now. Obviously, that's what everybody's discussing. Our goal in the coming year with this funding is to focus the AI RMF and look specifically at the risks associated with generative AI, working with the community. We'd also like to develop a public working group who can provide input and also provide feedback on the risks associated with generative AI. But we will be working very, very closely with the community, specifically focusing these funds.
I see my time's expired. I yield back.
Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman now, the chairman now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Babin, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Lucascio, for being here. NIST carries out research and development to enhance the resilience of buildings and infrastructure to natural hazards, including earthquakes. We don't have many of those in Texas, but a lot of wind, a lot of hurricanes, fires, and others. NIST also will deploy teams to study the aftermath of a disaster to improve these standards, codes, and practices for buildings and infrastructure. Does the President's budget request include funding for these activities?
Yes, thank you for that question. The President's budget request does include additional support to support our investigations of disasters. And, it's critically important for us to get that funding because as we do these investigations, they really do translate, as you mentioned, into building codes and standards that will safeguard people for years to come, right? It will really change the way we approach our building in disaster-prone areas and really all over the country and the world.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. In fiscal year 23 omnibus, NIST received $40 million in no-year supplemental disaster relief funds to investigate the impacts of hurricanes, typhoons, and wildfires in calendar year 2022 to support the development of resilience standards, along with the first question, in regard to weather and climate disasters. In addition to the underlying research to support these standards and for necessary expenses to carry out investigations of building failures pursuant to the National Construction Safety Team Act of 2002. Has NIST awarded any of these funds, and if so, can you tell me what they were awarded for?
I could give you a very detailed breakdown of what we have done so far with those funds, and I'd be happy to follow up with you on that. But we are using those to continue the investigation in Surfside and related to Hurricane Ian, Hurricane Maria, and others. And yes, we are using those funds, and they are being expended, but I'd be happy to get a detailed report on that back to you.
Okay, thank you. Earlier this year, NIST released the Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework, RMF. a voluntary framework to guide organizations in incorporating trustworthiness into the design, development, and deployment of AI systems. The committee is aware that NIST is expanding upon the AI RMF by creating industry profiles that contain actionable guidance for implementing this safe AI for specific use cases. How will NIST ensure these efforts to advance trustworthy AI are deployed into real-world use by stakeholders?
Thank you for that question. The AI RMF is really an important document put out by NIST, developed to promote trustworthy AI, exactly for that purpose. It is pro-innovation, and it is also promoting responsible use of AI. And it has been developed in concert with stakeholders very closely so that the end result is a product that is usable by them and used by them as they are developing AI and as they are thinking about promoting or incorporating AI solutions into their current business practices. So we're developing a resource center for them to understand how to use it. We're working with the community and developing use cases. So there's a lot going on right now in terms of how we are supporting AI and promoting the use of the AI RMF. Thank you for that question.
Okay, I want to jump over to quantum research now. NIST's budget request includes $220 million for laboratory programs on fundamental measurement, quantum science, and measurement dissemination research. NIST is a leader in quantum research. Can you talk a little bit about NIST's role in carrying out the National Quantum Initiative? And can you point towards specific outcomes over the last 5 years that have advanced U.S. leadership in quantum science? And then finally, how much does NIST plan to spend on fundamental measurement, quantum science, and measurement dissemination this year? But if you'd answer the first questions first.
Sure. NIST has been involved in quantum science for decades, and we have 4 Nobel Prizes that are awarded to our scientists who have been working in this field. We do research to standards development, to tech transfer, to technology development, and now with the National Quantum Initiative, we have developed the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, which brings together these nascent industries thinking about how to translate this into our economy for the benefit of the new quantum economy in the United States. So our work is really complete along that entire trajectory. You have an exciting new technology, and now how are you going to cement it in the United States for the benefit of the U.S.?
Absolutely. I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, so I will yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Ross, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to you and Ranking Member Lofgren for holding this hearing to discuss the importance of NIST funding and the agency's ongoing work. Just this week, NIST awarded a grant to NC State University in my district to support the North Carolina Manufacturing Extension Partnership's National Supply Chain Optimization and Intelligence Network program, which will improve the resiliency and optimization for domestic supply chains in my home state and across the country. So thank you for that. And I'm excited to follow the work on this project at NC State and everything NIST does. And I look forward to hearing even more from you, Dr. Lucascio. You've done such a wonderful job responding to so many questions. I'm going to shift the conversation to cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. The work NIST does regarding cybersecurity standards and best practices is incredibly valuable to organizations across the globe. The NIST cybersecurity framework is widely adopted, so much so that some companies use it as their domestic cybersecurity standard and baseline. NIST is in the process of updating the cybersecurity framework. Can you discuss the process and what is being updated?
Oh, yes, I really do appreciate that question. We began the update process last year with our first kickoff meeting, and we had 7,000 people sign up for that. It was a huge reception, 100 different countries. So I think that really indicates that people are very interested in how we can develop this update to the framework, how well it's adopted not only nationally, but also how it's received internationally and how it can really underpin global standards as they develop. So our like-minded partners and allies are very excited about it as well. The biggest change is really a piece around governance and how people manage and govern processes around cybersecurity within their organizations. And we think it's a really important update. We've gotten a lot of feedback from many different sectors, including universities, like you just mentioned at the beginning. And so we think we're really anticipating a lot of input also from small businesses on this particular draft. So we're looking forward to that. Thank you for the question.
Well, just as a follow-up, how does NIST help with the implementation? And you raised the question about small businesses. Small businesses don't have a cybersecurity person on their payroll who has expertise. How do you help people who might not have that internal expertise?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. It's one of the questions that we got very early on. How are small businesses really going to be able to use this? And so we spent a lot of time developing resources for small business. We have a small business community of interest. We have a small business corner that people can go and just sort of see how other small businesses have used it. But our goal is to really bring them together to help them understand how it can be implemented. And we do that virtually, but we also have a place, the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, where they can come and work with us and figure out the best use cases and solutions that are appropriate for small businesses.
Great. And I know that the president's budget request asked for an additional $20 million to support privacy and cybersecurity work. Can you tell us how you might use that money?
Yeah, so part of it will be used for improving cybersecurity improving the cybersecurity framework, the next edition. We're also working on new privacy, on the updating and working on dissemination of the privacy framework, which is another very key portion of the NIST work, which promotes privacy and in concert with the cybersecurity framework. So our work moving forward will be to disseminate these two products and also to do more deep technical research and understanding where there are issues that are difficult to solve with relation to privacy and cybersecurity.
Thanks. With the few seconds I have left, I've done a lot of work to promote a pipeline of our next cybersecurity workers. And can you tell us more about the nature of NIST's K through 12 outreach and describe how you're helping design experiences that will help our students engage in STEM and be lifelong learners?
Oh, I appreciate that. And, you know, we have also, I missed totally on talking about the workforce development that's going to be happening with the new cybersecurity funding in FY24. It's a really important part of the component of the whole research that we do in development at NIST is to engage the next generation of cyber workforce. So we are also working to develop many different ways to outreach to K through 12, and in general working on trying to figure out how to bring new and diverse populations into the cyber workforce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And the lady yields back, and the chairman had other responsibilities, so he's going to let me, you got me now. So I really appreciate your testimony, and I really appreciate your experience and background. The fact that you have I was looking at your bio, you have 115 scientific papers, and you've got 12 patents in the fields of bioengineering, as well as analytical chemistry. So I give you great credit for that. So that leads to my question. My first question is that, you know, lately with platforms such as ChatGPT, there's a major concern with intellectual property rights regarding where the information is gathered from, and also concerns about how accurate the information is. So I guess I'd like or we would like to have your thoughts about how accurate that information is, and then intellectual property rights.
So you're talking specifically around how accurate the information that you get out of GPT or?
Yes. Or anything else you
Yeah.
think is important. You're the one with all the degrees, so.
I can't really speak to that, but I appreciate the question. As far as the accuracy of the platform, one of the things that we think about is at NIST is how to make sure that the data that we provide is accurate and can be cited accurately. I know there are a lot of discussions around how to input accurate data into those types of models, and NIST spends a lot of time thinking about data sets that can be used to train AI models, but we're not specifically involved in ChatGPT, and I really can't speak to the accuracy of the information that you get out of ChatGPT. I can speak to the accuracy of the data that would be available to be pulled into any platform.
Well, the way I understand it, the GPT actually uses AI to interact with
Right.
you with questions and give you good answers, supposedly. But anyway, I appreciate your perspective on that. You know, the other area, I'm really interested in this CHIPS program and the CHIPS and Science Act that authorized NIST to develop 3 new manufacturing institutes that were focused on semiconductor and manufacturing. The bill provided $100 million in fiscal year '22, 47 in '23, and 118 in '24 in mandatory funds to establish these 1 or more institutes. Could you give us some kind of an idea and provide us any updates on the plans and development of these institutes? As well as, do you have any timeline for when we can be putting out a request for proposals?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. So the research and development piece of the CHIPS R&D has 4 different components, and we are working very hard to make sure that these are all aligned and can work seamlessly with each other. So what we have been doing for the past 6 months is really planning the phased approach of how we are going to initiate the NSTC, the packaging program, the Manufacturing USA Institute, and the NIST metrology program. So we want to make sure they're linked and that industries can enter each one of those seamlessly and know how to access all the resources that we have within the CHIPS R&D program. With regard to your specific question on when you will see a request for proposals, that will be coming later this year.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm really glad that we're, you know, I want to make sure that our CHIPS program is ahead of China or any other adversary we might have. And so I appreciate having the talent you have and having NIST working on that. I think it's extremely important. And so the other question I had relates to my colleagues across the aisle keep a provision in the CHIPS and Science Act that would further Congress's effort to strengthen our research security at our nation's academic research institutions. I think that's a pretty important idea. This provision gives universities the tools they need to protect sensitive research from cyber theft by requiring NIST to assist research-intensive universities in adopting the cybersecurity framework to help mitigate cybersecurity risk related to conducting research. And so we've got about 17 seconds for you to tell me an update on that idea.
Yeah, so we are working with universities. Right now we have a section on our website that talks specifically under the CMSF how they can implement, and we are now working. We have a request for information out to universities to find out how best to support them. But I came from a university, and I was involved in research security. Actually, I was leading the research security efforts, so I understand the importance of reaching out to our universities.
Absolutely, and thank you for that answer. And
Thank
so
you.
I yield back to myself, I guess. And so who's up next? Mr. Sorensen from Illinois.
Thank you to the chairman and ranking member for convening this hearing, and Dr. Lucascio for your willingness to appear today. And thank you for the hard work that is not always recognized. Last month, this committee passed the Trank Research Act, which requires the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, to support research to identify xylazine, synthetic opioids, and other dangerous subjects of concern. On the other hand, NIST, through the Science and Technical Research and Services Program, tasked with studying the impacts of hurricanes, typhoons, wildfires, to support the development of climate resilience standards. Before coming to Congress, I served my district for nearly 20 years as a meteorologist. And my job was to present meteorology in an accurate and digestible manner so that my community could make good decisions to protect their property and the lives of families. NIST promotes resilient standards so these communities can better prepare themselves and their infrastructure for disasters such as flooding that we along the Mississippi River in western Illinois are just getting through here today. We've seen some of the costliest disasters in our nation happen just in the past few years. For example, in 2020, the Iowa and Illinois derecho left $11.5 billion worth of damage in its wake. How can Congress assist NIST in ensuring that the codes and the standards that the agency helps to develop are implemented in such a way that they'll result in future disasters being less costly?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And it is really devastating what we're seeing all over the country. And we've been asked to participate in many more investigations than we ever have. Clearly, it's important, and that's why it's part of this budget. The way that we do our work is to make sure that whatever we do is an answer that's appropriate for any changes that could be necessary in order to make a rebuilt community more disaster resilient, or to shore up codes so that people can become disaster resilient in an existing building. And so, so really the quality of the data and the information that we provide not only feeds into codes and international standards, but also gets adopted. And the way it gets adopted is that we work very closely regionally and nationally and internationally to assure that these are built into the next generation of infrastructure.
Because we also have to understand that the weather that we're seeing today, the extreme weather today, is a product of the warming up to yesterday. So understanding as this continues to worsen, we're going to have bigger disasters in the future. How does NIST coordinate with the Department of Ag to prepare our agriculture, our farmers, with the next disaster?
I think that's a very good question, and I would say we don't coordinate necessarily to prepare them for disasters. Our response is to find out what could happen and how we can shore up infrastructure, and that in general supports the farmers. But we don't do. We work with the Department of Agriculture, but I'm not being able to come up with the best way that we coordinate with them, and I would love to get back to you on that.
We can
That's
follow
okay.
up on that,
That'd
surely.
be great.
Oh,
Thank you.
on a related note, NIST has an online economic decision tool to help communities plan for disasters. The tool helps communities plan infrastructure
Right,
investments based on accurate
Right.
data. How can we work and live with these disasters in the future? And does NIST have any plans to expand on this resilience tool in the 2024 budget, for instance?
So we don't have specific funds for that particular tool in the 2024 budget. Most of the funding that we are using in the 2024 budget is to really shore up our ability to do disaster investigations and the supporting research to surround investigations and the conclusions from investigations. But we do have an ongoing commitment to making sure that community resilience tool is up to date, and we work with the communities to make sure that it meets their needs and how it's implemented.
And I see my time is up, so I yield
Thank
back.
you.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back, and next we go to Alabama.
Thank you, Chairman Baird, and thank you, Dr. Lucascio, for sharing your expertise with us today. Dr. Lucascio, China is leveraging its position to gain influence in the organizations that develop international telecommunication standards, such as the Third Generation Partnership Project and the standards for 2035. How can the U.S. be more effective in countering increased Chinese engagement in the development of these international standards?
Sure. So thank you for that question. And I think one very clear win on the U.S. side and with like-minded partners was the election of Doreen Bogdan-Martin and ITU, and that I think has a tremendous impact globally. We all understand that ITU runs very differently than other standards development organizations. It is country by country, and so therefore it's important that we have a leadership there that can represent what America stands for.
Thank you. How will NIST protect U.S. quantum leadership before international standard-setting bodies?
So that's a really interesting question because there are a number of activities right now happening within international standards bodies that are directed at quantum, even before the quantum market really exists, and that's unusual for us, right? Typically, the market exists, then the standards come, but we aren't at that place anymore. We're really at a place where we need to be proactive in critical and emerging technologies, make sure that we are at the table promoting U.S. innovation and our competitive technologies, and bring them to the table in the International Standards Forum and represent leadership positions there as well. So NIST is really at the forefront of that.
Thank you. Chairman Baird, I yield back.
Thank you.
That gentleman yields back, and next we go to Representative Fucci from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Lofgren for this convening, and Director Lucascio for your testimony at today's hearing. As you know, NIST plays a critical role for my district, North Carolina's 4th, and last month I was proud to join President Biden and Secretary Raimondo during their visit to Wolfspeed in Durham for the first stop of the administration's Investing in America tour. And thanks to President Biden's bold economic plan and Congress's historic investments in American advanced manufacturing, research, and innovation, I am proud that North Carolina and my district are serving at the forefront of strengthening our nation's innovative edge and playing our role in the Made in America initiative. So, Dr. Lucascio, there were several provisions in the CHIPS and Science Act designed to ensure that Americans of all backgrounds have the opportunity and access to participate and benefit from this landmark law in terms of both the business owners and the workforce. It is critical that we support minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, and women-owned businesses in CHIPS-funded projects, and increase the participation of economically disadvantaged individuals in the semiconductor workforce. The CHIPS Program Office, according to the law, must assign personnel specifically to focus on opportunity and inclusion. Can you discuss how NIST is currently satisfying these requirements with its CHIPS for America programs?
Thank you for that question. Yes, we have already hired, as a matter of fact, several months ago, it was one of our early hires, somebody who can focus directly on that issue, and she's our diversity and inclusion lead. And we are thinking about that really in every aspect of our program. Not only, as you mentioned, workforce development is critical. We want to make sure we don't miss anybody, and we bring them all into this semiconductor ecosystem that we were building for the United States, which is so exciting. But also build them into the R&D ecosystem, bring everyone into the R&D ecosystem, and allow everyone to be successful as they launch their new companies, right, and in venture. So I was an innovator who launched my own company, a woman-owned business, and so I really do want to see opportunities open for everyone to succeed. Thank you.
And I was very happy to see the workforce development requirements in the program's first notice of funding opportunity. The NOFO supports good job practices, expands child care for companies seeking over $150 million in grant funding, and includes the use of union labor. Given that less than a quarter of the semiconductor workforce are women, child care support rather, should go a long way to attract more women in good-paying semiconductor jobs. Can you discuss the importance of supporting the human capital needed for our CHIPS investments to succeed? And how is NIST thinking about supporting the microelectronics workforce in the United States?
Yeah, so if you think about it, thank you for that question. If you think about it, it's pretty daunting, the amount of jobs that we are about to create with this funding, with this $50 billion, plus the $2 billion from the microelectronics commons out of DoD. We have a big gap to fill, 180,000 new jobs. So we cannot leave anyone behind, and it is a critical part of our thinking. How are we going to fill those jobs? How are we going to engage everyone from across the United States to be actively engaged in training, upskilling, and really meeting the needs of this new workforce demand that we're about to create? Since manufacturing left the United States holistically, we've lost the ability to train those types of people for these kinds of jobs. And we are wholly focused on that through the CHIPS Act and through the Manufacturing USA program as well. And MEP, thank you.
And lastly, how are you coordinating with other agencies on this?
Yeah, so we are coordinating with many other agencies, NSF primarily in the workforce development, but also DOE, DOD, and all the other agencies who are involved in this in the semiconductor area and who are part of CHIPS. So we have many conversations, ongoing conversations about how to most effectively meet the demand across many different levels of skills, right? From the people who are going to be the technicians in the fabs all the way to the PhD innovators who are going to be creating the new companies.
Thank you. That's my time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, and next we go to Florida with Representative Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Lucascio, for being here with us this morning. My first question, in the last Congress, I introduced H.R. 4956. It was the Leadership in Global Tech Standards Act of 2021. It was going to direct the Small Business Administration to award grants to small businesses to participate in the standards and development process. A similar provision was incorporated into the CHIPS and Science Act, which requires a pilot program that's going to award grants to private companies, nonprofits, and academia to incentivize and support their participation in international standard setting. Just wondering if you could talk to us about that. You know, what are the plans for it? How do you see it being implemented? And does the president's budget support this?
Well, thank you for that question. Yes, it's very, very important that, as you said, the title of the bill, Leadership in Global Tech, it's very important at the standards table that we are able to engage all the right technical experts, because that's really how you do the best work at the international standards table, right? You're sitting there, you have the best technological solutions, and you have the people who can promote and defend them in an international arena. And so we need the experts there. And so NIST is planning to have numerous activities that will be related to trying to engage and provide the ability for small companies and universities to participate in the international standards arena. There are many mechanisms we're considering. We are going to be forming a center of excellence around standards development, and that will be one mechanism likely through which we'll pull and draw in for training and education around standards development and how to participate most effectively at the international level.
Well, I appreciate that. I often hear from small businesses, they have great ideas, and a lot of the innovators want to participate at a deeper level, but it's just hard for them to get engaged in the process.
Absolutely, and one of the things that we do is we do pre-competitive research with a lot of small companies, and that allows us to bring their information also to the standards table if they don't want to be there directly.
Great, thank you. Shifting over to cybersecurity, NIST plays a critical role in the nation's cybersecurity, and your organization helps reduce cyber risks to federal agencies, multiple industries, and critical infrastructure through the creation of voluntary frameworks and standards. How is NIST using its cybersecurity expertise to assist federal agencies in improving critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, and such as assisting in the adoption and the application of the cybersecurity framework?
So our cybersecurity framework does have very broad reach and global adoption and very, very strong adoption within the United States. But we understand there are gaps and that we need to be communicating with the right people at the right all the time in order to make sure that it can get adopted into specific areas. And so critical infrastructure, of course, is a very important part of the work that we do, communicating with people who are involved in critical infrastructure and making sure the cybersecurity framework is adopted and included in the way that they think about shoring up their security of their information systems.
Thank you. The president's budget requests an increase of $20 million for further investment in NIST cybersecurity and in privacy portfolios to meet increased demand in the areas of critical national importance. To the extent that you're able to here, can you talk to us about where further investment is needed and how the president's budget's going to support that?
Yes, thank you for that question. So in cybersecurity, we have many different areas that we're working in, but we are focused in the budget on workforce development, cybersecurity supply chain, the security of our supply chains, and the development, I'll just give a few examples, and the development of post-quantum cryptography standards that can make sure that we are prepared for the next generation of computing and protected against it in terms of our encryption algorithms. So we have a number of different activities that we're doing, but related to workforce, development of the new cybersecurity framework, and security for post-quantum encryption algorithms.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Lucascio. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and we're going to stay in Florida with Representative Frost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Like it was mentioned, I am from Florida, a state uniquely threatened by the effects of global warming caused by greenhouse gas emissions. And so I'm glad that NIST is taking the threat seriously by asking for the $5.5 million increase in funding to assess the impact of carbon on the environment. And we know that forests can be effective at absorbing carbon pollution, but currently deforestation in places like the Amazon and in the American West make it more and more difficult to slow global warming. And plus, it's already difficult to measure how these offset emissions at a rate that will be helpful in mitigating climate change. You have mentioned that NIST is working on metrics around CO2 removal, both with natural-based solutions and others. Can you describe how that work on CO2 removal and how the additional funding you're requesting will help further that work?
Yes, thank you for that question. So we have a number of activities that have been going on for a long time in terms of being able to accurately measure and monitor carbon dioxide and its removal. And we work with a number of other agencies, NOAA, NASA, and others, to ensure the quality of measurements that are made around carbon dioxide in our world and how it's removed. Some of this new money will be specifically focused on a continued understanding of the development of new technologies for carbon removal and sequestration, and also an understanding of how natural sources contribute to carbon dioxide removal.
How will this work benefit everyday people in Florida and people across the globe long term?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Our work is really to ensure that we have accurate measurements and an understanding of what is going on with all of the different sources of carbon dioxide that are in our world, right, around our spaces in the United States, around the globe. And so it is really the underpinning work that we do that assures that people can understand what is going on in the environment. But at the same time, we're developing new technologies that can help people capture carbon and to understand carbon accounting as well. So there are many ways that NIST work will help you in your state, but also really help the world.
Yeah, and along with the climate crisis, Central Florida, in my district, we're currently experiencing one of the worst affordable housing crises in the entire country. So we need a lot of housing. We need it quickly, but we also have to ensure that it's safe, especially with the horrible storms that we're getting. With those climate threats in mind, can you please explain how NIST supports investigations under the National Construction Safety Team Act to help build safe for the environment?
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. NIST supports investigations under that authority, so we conduct investigations under that authority. And as a matter of fact, we've been in your state, not in your district, for a while now. And we are asked frequently, can we come and study this new disaster? And more often, people come to us to ask us that. We have a matrix under which we look to see if the work that we do, should NIST be brought in, first of all. And the reason why NIST should be brought in under any circumstances is, first of all, there's a loss of human life that has been devastating, and of course, as it would be, and can NIST really do some research that would help understand how to make it better next time? Right, so that's how we participate. We do long-term research. We go into these places like Surfside, try to understand what did cause the collapse, and then parlay that into building codes and standards that can ensure the quality of construction moving forward.
And can you quickly, so Florida Makes, which is a business in my district, received $2 million in the MEP funding from NIST to help rebuild small and medium-sized businesses after the storm. Can you talk briefly about how that funding impacts the work that you do to help rebuild businesses after climate disasters?
So I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Sorry.
In 2017, Florida Makes, a business in our district, received $2 million in MEP funding from NIST to help support the rebuilding of businesses.
Yeah, so the MEP funding is really there to support business resilience in the location where this occurs. So the disaster, the money that we got in the disaster bill was really focused on that. How can you help communities come back? How can their businesses come back? And how can they thrive after a disaster? And so that funding is specifically for that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your work. The work that NIST does, it's incredibly integral to what goes on in my state, especially with the horrible climate disasters that we experience every single year. So thank you for that work, and I yield.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you. And next we go to Representative McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, by the way. This is very enlightening. During the Obama administration, a legacy sign-on service called login.gov was provided by the General Services Administration Technology Transformation Services to help people access accounts with government agencies ranging from the IRS to Social Security Administration. The login.gov website states it is, quote, the public's one account and password for the government, end quote. Following a March 2023 GSA OIG report, bipartisan scrutiny of the website program has been renewed. The GSA OIG report found, again, quote, GSA misled their customer agencies when GSA failed to communicate login.gov's known non-compliance with the National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-63-3 Digital Identity Guidelines, specifically Identity Assurance Level 2. It further states that, once again, quote, GSA continued to mislead customer agencies even after GSA suspended efforts to meet SP 800-63-3. These agencies charged over $10 million for cybersecurity services that weren't even provided in the first place. This is incredibly concerning for me, as somebody who basically is responsible for these taxpayer dollars and its lack of security that they're applied. Were you aware of this report?
I am aware of this report, yes.
Okay. Just to kind of add, and I'm going to set up the question for you just so you can knock it out of the park, if you will. When it comes to digital identity proofing, what does NIST Identity Assurance Level 2 compliance mean in combating identity theft, and why would Biden administration want a government-driven product like login.gov to achieve that particular standard to the extent that it would even mislead other federal agencies about having those capabilities? In other words, we're spending a lot of money, we don't have the cybersecurity it's promised, and it's a one site serves all. That's worrisome to me when it comes to securing people's identity, which we're all concerned about, and we don't even have something, a fail-safe that's working right now.
So NIST does produce digital identity guidelines, and you're right. We have IAL2 compliance is what you're referring to, or the IAL2, the Identity Assurance Guideline. We have recently also updated that. We don't audit other agencies, and I really can't speak to the GSA issue. But I will say that we have recently updated our guidelines, and that's available for and has broad uptake by the community as well.
Okay, guidelines, got it. The IAL2 standard has been referred to as, once again, quote, not just a compliance requirement. In the world of remote identity proofing, it is a line between a system that can fend off bulk identity theft attacks coming from an organized criminals and one that cannot, end quote. Despite the troubling findings of the OIG report, the White House reportedly still wants to move forward on mandating the use of login.gov through executive order at all federal agencies. It's already mandated at the VA through va.gov, which once again alarms me if we don't have the proper, you can have guidelines, but if you don't have the actual security and it's mandated, you can understand how this would be very concerning to any veteran or anybody else who wants to use these websites. How does NIST play into that? Besides guidelines, is there any true, are you hammering this home with people, that this is a real concern for people's identity that's being required by a government to use?
So our role is to produce these guidelines, and we don't do the compliance piece. But we produce the important information that people need to know in order to secure their systems. And they are publicly available and used.
Thank you. I'm just going to give you one more chance to comment on this because I think this is important to hammer home because this affects a lot of Americans, anybody who wants to use the Gov site. What is GSA's misrepresentation of the login.gov's IAL2 capabilities mean for veterans and their dependents trying to access sign-in services to verify their identity? Since you're the expert, I'll let you have the final word.
I'm sorry. I appreciate the question, but I cannot comment on that. But thank you.
With that, I yield.
Thank you. And now we go to Representative McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Lucascio. It is exciting to see NIST programs and how they're supporting domestic manufacturing capacity. Just last year, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership in Martinsville, Virginia, helped maintain over 1,300 jobs. And in my district, it has supported smaller businesses that provide machining and industrial services, as well as manufacturers of specialized materials and electric motors. And we're pretty excited about that. And I will say, as a mother of 2 young children who has seen firsthand how difficult it is to find affordable quality childcare, I'm very excited that the administration recognizes how critically important childcare is to maintaining a good workforce. So thank you for that as well. At the launch of NIST's AI risk management framework, Dr. Alondra Nelson, the former acting director of OSTP, noted that AI tools are too often developed without the input or the consent of the people whose lives they will touch. Can you discuss how NIST's budget supports broad public engagement to ensure that diverse perspectives are incorporated in these frameworks?
Yeah, so I thank you for that question. As we develop our work in AI risk management, we engage the community very, very broadly. Moving forward, we intend to have a public working group with the new FY24 funds. To have a public working group through which we can obtain the perspectives of everyone and everyone. We want to hear from everyone to understand their concerns, the impact on the communities, and the impact on the individuals around the country and the organizations. And so I think that's a really important part of how we plan to move forward with the AI RMF.
And given the increased use of AI in applications that include healthcare, criminal justice, decision-making, there is a huge potential for algorithmic bias to exacerbate social inequities. Can you talk about NIST's work to develop guidance to help organizations that make algorithms avoid this garbage in, garbage out problem?
Yeah, thank you for that. So that is clearly a risk associated with AI. The AI risk management framework looks at technical characteristics like accuracy. Is your algorithm accurate? But it also really looks at the human at the end, right? Is it biased? Is it fair? Is it safe? Is it secure? And I think that's what makes it very different from anything else that NIST has ever produced, because we really do think of holistically about responsible and trustworthy AI and the human impact on it. So we've had a lot of impact from community groups in that regard. And moving forward, we will continue to make sure that's a priority, and that we can help people understand how to measure their systems for bias.
Thank you for that. A recent GA report found gender-related imbalances in career advancement and leadership roles at NIST, as well as an unwelcoming environment, that was their quote, for women that may cause some to leave. Will NIST's budget request for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives help address these issues?
Absolutely. That is #1 priority for me.
And can you elaborate on how?
So recently, yes, of course. Recently, we're in the process of hiring our second chief diversity officer. Our first chief diversity officer now works for the House. So we lost her, but we're in the process of hiring our second one. And we have a new diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility strategic plan that we launched last year with a tremendous amount of engagement across the organization. There are multiple layers of things that we are looking at doing. First, making sure that everything that we do represents NIST the way that we want it to be represented externally and internally. Make everyone know that they're welcome and included in the way that we think about NIST. But also, we cannot ignore the fact that we have to continue to measure and monitor how we're doing as we implement new programs toward promotions, recruitment, retention of diverse candidates. So,
Thank you for that. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Williams, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Lucascio, I come out of the tech industry, so I have spent a lot of time in industry technology standard meetings around the IEEE, ITU, ISO, ISA, and IEEE. All the fun people are there. It's really exciting. And it is just, for context, for my colleagues that, our phone that we rely on encompasses, I'm going to make up a number, but easily hundreds of different standards, many of which, come and originate out of the NIST. So certainly appreciate your work, and I'm so glad to be freed from those industry standards meetings. But there's two issues, I think, pretty straightforward questions today. And just to tee it up for you, one is just status on the Manufacturing USA program, and the second is related to other components around chip fab, specifically about printed circuit boards. So if I may, just provide a little context, and then those are the two areas of questions. We're very fortunate to have Micron investing in my district, historically important and historically large investment. And of course, the CHIPS Act and your work at NIST, is critical to that success. And can you provide me an update, and all of us an update, on the status of the Manufacturing USA program, and specifically as it relates to semiconductors? And I understand that there will be 3 sites selected for institutes. I'm not sure if that's still current, but if you could just give me and my colleagues some context there, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We had an RFP that we released last year. We got a lot of information from people on what they think we should be doing with the Manufacturing USA funds, specifically around semiconductors. We have the funding, of course, as you know, and the authorization to do one or up to 3.
Okay.
And so there are a number of ways that we've been looking at whether it should be 1 really large one or 3 smaller ones. And that specifically, that conversation is really around technology focus areas. Where are the gaps in our other R&D, CHIPS R&D programs that might not be filled and need to be filled by Manufacturing USA? For instance, more precise manufacturing techniques associated with that would be needed by the semiconductor industry, or 3D virtualization of components as you're putting them together, either in packaging or in fabrication. So, we are still considering one or up to three, but we will have the request for proposals, the notice of funding opportunity will be released at the end of this year, before the end of this year.
Okay, thank you for that context. That's more up to date than what I have. There's a company in my district, Graphic Technology, Inc., that does these printed circuit boards. And CHIPS really focuses on the semiconductor and not necessarily on the platform that they write on, which are these PCBs. There's a lot of supply chain issues, and a lot of the supplies come out of China. Can you just briefly tell me how you view that, or how NIST views that, and are we addressing that supply chain issue in part through some of the funding and programs that you're sponsoring?
Well, thank you for that question. There are a couple of ways we're looking at that. Issues around substrates, for instance, and supply chain in general. The second notice of funding opportunity will deal with supply chains. So the suppliers, basically the material suppliers and the instrument suppliers who serve the semiconductor industry, because obviously that's very critical to the success of any fabs that we build in the United States. So there will be funding opportunities for suppliers, critical suppliers, for the semiconductor industry. And then we also are going to be looking at funding opportunities for people to develop new types of substrates or advances in substrates as we look at the development of the packaging program, as we are developing the packaging program and establishing the NSTC.
Great, thank you. And just for my last few seconds here, just comment that before deciding to run for office, I was involved with the Open Process Automation Forum that is modernizing the industrial control systems for the process industries, which you may know is, oil and gas, chemical, food and beverage, et cetera. And we're using the NIST framework as the framework to develop that industrial cybersecurity for these open architecture systems. It's known as the Open Process Automation Standard. And so firsthand, I've actually had to use some of your documents, although I'm not on the technology side. But anyway, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentle lady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Lucascio, for your attendance today. The National Institute of Standards and Technology plays a critical role in advancing U.S. innovation and competitiveness. Away from the abstract, NIST's work has a direct impact on the daily lives of citizens to improve not only the quality of products, services, and infrastructure, but also improve our quality of life and standard of living. For example, SMS Group Incorporated, headquartered in my district, PA12, received NIST support to implement improvements to employee engagement, satisfaction, and morale. Innovation does not stop at technological development. American innovation includes the day-to-day human elements of our economy. It excites me to know more success stories like these are bound to occur in my district and across the country through the work that is done with funding for NIST. This work changes lives. Dr. Lucascio, methane emissions from orphaned and abandoned oil and gas wells in my district threaten public safety, public health, and it contributes significantly to climate change. How is research in developing greenhouse gas measurement tools and standards being utilized to protect my constituents from polluted air? And how do we hold polluting corporations accountable?
Thank you for that question. So we're developing a number of new technologies, but I think the most important thing is that we're developing the measurements and standards so that people can apply those technologies to more accurately understand the sources and the concentrations in the environment. So we are there working across the community to ensure that these standards are met and our standards are used and can meet the demands of of the local economies so that they can understand their issues. Some of the funding that we're going to be asking for in the 24 budget is specifically around measuring greenhouse gases. And we have programs called the Urban Dome, and the Urban Dome is really to kind of do a holistic assessment of the presence of greenhouse gases in the environment in specific regions in the country.
Thank you. I highlighted earlier that the American innovation we strive for in the committee is not limited to technology. How critical to achieving the NIST mission is it to support workers through prioritizing grant funding to companies that utilize union labor and expanded access to childcare, for instance?
So you've seen everyone, we've talked about this a few times already, thank you for that question, of the what is available in the CHIPS incentives portion of the manufacturing incentives that we've just released, which do include childcare, and we've had a lot of discussions around that. Workforce development is really a critical piece of anything that we do. It's really important to make sure that everybody can be engaged and come to the table and have the opportunities. And we need so many people in the tech sector. We're trying to compete with China right now for global technology leadership. And so we cannot miss the opportunity to have everyone engaged in our technology economy.
Thank you. So my district is home to some of the worst air quality in the nation on any given day. SKC Incorporated, a local business in Western Pennsylvania, manufactures quality air sampling equipment and is one of thousands of success stories under the Haulings Manufacturing Extension Program. How does NIST strategically target partners for technical assistance to support underrepresented populations in manufacturing?
First of all, I would thank you for that question. I would love to hear more specifics about that case, because if we aren't working with them, we may want to work with them in our new programs that we're building around air capture and air quality. But the way that we typically do things in an open competition model, where we look for opportunities to have people compete, and then we select the best possible innovative solution that can meet the demands of what we're trying to accomplish. But we have a very important focus on making sure that we get solutions from a diverse audience, because that's where the creativity comes from, right? If we have more people engaged in creative solutions, then we come up with better outcomes. And so we have methods to make sure that we can promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of our processes.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your time and for your answers. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, the President's budget request asked for $98 million for the Manufacturing USA program. There's a 165% increase over appropriated levels. Now, according to the budget justification, this investment would lead to 10 new centers by FY 2028. Can you explain what 10 areas of advanced manufacturing these centers would cover? And I don't want you to include the centers focused on semiconductors now, on the manufacturing, because they're already receiving a total of $265 million in mandatory funds that are in FY 24 for its 3 centers.
Thank you very much for that question. So NIST, unlike other agencies who form Manufacturing USA institutes, do an open competition, really looking for the needs of the community at any given time. And so when we ran our first open competition, we had a variety of different sectors that came to the table, and we selected a Biomanufacturing USA Institute, NIMBLE, and formed that. So we are going to be launching an open competition in very soon, before the end of the year. And we'll be calling for concept proposals where people can tell us what they think we should be funding, and then a full competition. We'll down select and do a full competition before the end of that we will award in mid-24.
All right, thank you. My common sense legislation, the Trank Research Act, is about to be considered on the House floor. This legislation directs NIST to play a more active role in addressing the rapid spread of fentanyl containing xylazine, a drug cocktail commonly known as Trank. Can you speak on the unique capabilities of NIST to analyze illicit drugs like Trank, the work NIST has done already in this area, and the ways NIST can help local first responders who are on the front line of this drug crisis?
Thank you so much for that question. We have been working in the area, doing research in the areas of drugs of abuse detection for decades, and always trying to stay ahead and understand how we can prepare people to detect what's coming, right? And so our research, we have research in collaboration with state that allows us to measure and monitor what we find from the street drugs that are submitted to our program, and then disseminate that information so that people understand not only what to anticipate, but how to measure it, right? How to measure it themselves in what they're finding locally.
Okay. From what part of the president's budget request will these activities be funded?
The work particularly related to Trank,
Yeah.
I have to get back to you because I don't believe that we asked specifically for funding for that program.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Gentleman yields back. The
Yes.
chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Salinas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the chairman and the ranking member for today's hearing, and thank you, Dr. Lucascio, for your participation. As many of my colleagues, I'm very interested in the issue of workforce development. In my district, Oregon 6, manufacturing accounts for nearly 40,000 jobs, and I hear consistently that businesses need more skilled technical workers. And as you've mentioned, as we roll out these new programs from CHIPS and Science Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, Inflation Reduction Act, the need for those workers is really going to grow. And we recently had the directors of NSF and NASA before this committee, and I was excited to hear about some of their efforts in this area, particularly the NSF Regional Innovation Engine program. Our Oregon universities are partnering with manufacturers in my district on an RIE proposal in the semiconductor space, which would include a substantial workforce training component. And so with all these new opportunities, I want to be sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck. These are good jobs that often don't require a four-year degree, as you well know, and we have a chance really to bring students from diverse backgrounds into critical industries for our future economy. And thank you for your exchange with my colleague from North Carolina, Ms. Fushi, and others. So my first question is, how will proposed budget cuts to our NIST civilian workforce affect the deployment of this new manufacturing and technology workforce?
So first of all, I haven't been very specific about our workforce programs. Thank you for that question, because we are in the process of really putting together our and announcing our workforce programs within CHIPS. So that's coming. So you can anticipate that coming. And we are bringing together universities and industries to really target and find out how best to link them to answer the needs of the community. So that, I think, is very important. So related to the CHIPS workforce, obviously that funding is existing and it's not impacted by any potential budget cuts, right? So within other workforce development programs, we have very important programs related to cybersecurity workforce development. We have a lot of workforce development in quantum through our joint institutes. We have a lot of workforce development activities in really all areas of critical and emerging technologies. With budget cuts or decreases, it would sharply decrease our ability to promote the STEM workforce in areas of critical and emerging technologies, and at a time that these technologies are blooming and developing, and if we want to be the leading tech economy in the world, it is a really bad time to cut down on generating that next generation of STEM workforce.
Thank you. And then just a quick follow-up. I feel like this is a softball for you, but is there more that Congress could do to help you and your counterparts at other agencies build that sustainable and inclusive STEM workforce pipeline?
Absolutely. I really appreciate that. We are already trying to work together in certain areas that are important for our economy. So I'll just give an example. We work with NSF in programs that we've recently released around the development of ICT technologies, and that has been, I think, a fantastic and exciting program. We also developed a new program with around AI, responsible AI, with NSF. So I think there are a number of ways that not only can Congress support us in our workforce development programs, but also support the agencies working together there.
Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Miller, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas and Ranking Member Lofgren, and thank you to Director Lucascio for joining us today. Director Lucascio, one of the driving imperatives behind passing the CHIPS Act last year was urgency. To be specific, the urgency was building leading-edge capacity within our borders like Intel's fabs in Ohio, and because it takes 3 years to build one of these fabs in time, remains of the essence. What is your timeline to begin issuing funds for large-scale and leading-edge fabs in particular?
Oh, thank you for that question. I can't give you the definitive timeline, but we are anticipating making announcements very soon, hopefully, that will give you an indication of when you should see the full funding announcements coming. I'll say that the first NOFO, we've received over 200 statements of interest related to the first notice of funding opportunity. We're hiring a lot of people to help us work through all of the different statements of interest. We're accepting full applications for fab facilities at this time. Each one will be negotiated independently. Each deal will be negotiated independently, so it's very complex deal making that will be conducted in order to get this right, to make sure that we make the best deals for the country and support and protect the taxpayer dollars. But you'll be seeing a lot out of the CHIPS R&D office and the CHIPS Manufacturing Incentives Office in the next few months.
Okay, thank you. So the next few months, we should see some movement on that?
You will see a lot of information coming out of both offices on what to anticipate coming next.
Is there any type of, and I don't mean to pry and push, but
No,
is there any
that's
type
okay.
of speculation or guesstimation that you could make as to where these, the funding is going to be allocated?
Where or when?
When?
We would like to, I cannot speak to when it will be allocated, I'm sorry. There's so many different factors that come into it because of the complexity of each one of the deals that we're going to be making to support leading edge, current generation, and mature node. But I'd be happy to talk to you more offline about how the things that are going to be rolling out. And we are trying to be as transparent as possible in the whole process and to let you know what our timelines are.
Okay, that would just be great because of the urgency of the nature and what we
Of
push for.
course.
We want to get it as fast as we can.
Of course, and that's our goal, is to make sure not only that we get it out as fast as we can, but we do it right and we protect taxpayer dollars. And that's our goal. And so we just need to make sure that we're doing it right.
Understood.
Thank you.
The National Environment Policy Act, NEPA, will apply to projects awarded grants. My understanding is that NEPA review could slow down fund dispersal to grantees and even construction by perhaps a minimum of 1.5 years or possibly longer. What are your plans to address that significant delay in the face of urgent need to bring these fabs online? Are there specific reforms that should be implemented within the NEPA process?
I really appreciate that question. We have encouraged everybody who is applying for these funds to think about this early on because, of course, and the big fabs already understand that, obviously, that it can cause project delays, and we want to be able to understand and anticipate any project delays. I talked to the CHIPS Program Office Director a few days ago, and he said that he's going to be putting probably 20% of his time toward looking at NEPA issues, and we are forming a NEPA team on the government side who can facilitate working around these issues specifically.
And just there's an actual strategy and a framework of a game plan that you have in place that's going to be able to implement this in the time frame that you would like? Because I hear your response and your fantastic answers, but I want to know how we're going to do it in terms of timelines, in terms of, you saying that we have this, but I want to know how we're going to do it and what are your direct answers to these questions is really what I would like to know.
And I hear your question very clearly, and I thank you for that question, and I would love to follow up with you with the office and talk more about engagement on how we can make sure that we can meet our timelines.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
One last one. Is the department currently reviewing existing categorical exclusions, CEs, to assess whether they could be used for proposed projects?
I'm sorry, I have to get back to you on that as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now turns to the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Stevens, for 5 minutes.
Thank you for the 5 minutes of questioning, and thank you to Director Lucascio for your incredible testimony. And in fact, it is such a delight to hear about NIST today in this committee and in the halls of Congress. For NIST is the secret engine that could in the Congress. And some of us had the privilege of coming over to Gaithersburg alongside you at the very end of the last term in Congress, right before we were about to have a new Congress come in. And one of the things I deeply appreciated was seeing the things that we don't oftentimes get to hear about. And by the way, it is such a delight to hear that, so many of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle are celebrating the bipartisan passage of the CHIPS and Science Act, and so interested to hear about its inner workings. And, as a polite reminder, we had 187 Democrats vote for CHIPS and 24 Republicans. And so just ask yourself, right, when it's time to take that vote, if you're going to be voting for that, particularly to our new members, because we know we did the work last term and we want to continue to build off of that. But if you don't mind, Director, do you mind just sharing a little bit about NIST that maybe we haven't heard today? Again, some of these surprise things, industries that you touch that don't necessarily come to the forefront of a hearing like this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question. NIST, since its 1901 was when we were born. That was brought up earlier. Since we were born, we have really adapted to what is coming on the horizon. So now that we are a digital economy, we are growing and growing in areas related to communication technology and information technology, so we can always meet the demands of the needs of the industry as they develop. Somebody asked me about quantum, and that is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, but I want to bring it up that we've been involved in quantum for decades and decades, and it's been our priority for decades before it was on anybody's mind. We were doing this very basic research that led to the development of quantum clocks that are more accurate than anywhere in the world, and that will lead to the redefinition of time on the global scale. That's the kind of work that we do.
Redefining time. In the humble place
time
called Gaithersburg, Maryland,
exactly.
In the NIST headquarters. And it's worth shining a light on and also bringing energy to. And in part, look, I was working in one of the Manufacturing USA institutes before I ever thought I would run for Congress, and working alongside NIST, and so appreciate your ability to sign MOUs and work very cross-functionally across government in a way that leads to profound outcomes and oftentimes puts you on a cutting edge. And I'll tell you, it was those budget cuts of 2017 that awakened me to the fact that we need to have more NIST champions in the Congress. We've got to have more people not just singing your praises, but doing this work alongside you to invest in your modernization, to make sure that we've got proper, buildings that aren't falling apart. And I've seen those pictures, and I know that's been asked today. But there's a proposal that has come about, I think it was voted on from the other side of the aisle, a budget of a 22% decrease to NIST. And here we are talking about competing with China, talking about, competing on the global stage, doing the quantum, doing the chips, doing industrial policy. What does it mean to our competitiveness with China if we do that 22% cut?
It's a dire outlook. And if you have seen, I'm sure you've seen the Australian Policy Institute, Strategic Policy Institute report that said 37 out of 44 leading technologies are being led by China. The U.S.
Say that again.
37 out of 44 leading technologies are led by China.
So we cut at our peril. We cut our budget at our, and I'm not, right. That's the deal. So you want to default. You want to have, cuts across the board, and maybe we might as well be going and voting for our adversaries.
It's a really difficult time in the context of today's global economy, not only in terms of our competition and technological solutions, but also who is going to be the shaper of the foundational rules of the next global economy. That's where we are.
Who's going to be the shaper? That is the question, and I think we leave that with the committee, Madam Director. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you. Great to see you.
The gentlelady's time has absolutely expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, a couple of questions. One of them is earlier with the ranking member, you touched on standard SEP, standard essential patents. Mm-hmm. You made a decision to eliminate the 2019 standard and not replace it even till today with a replacement. Is that correct? I know you have a proposed, but you have not replaced it.
We have not replaced it.
So basically, during that intervening period, Europe is going forward with a standard that we now have to come in second to. Doesn't the absence of guidance at the time that if you didn't like the previous one, the offered changes, if you knew what was, quote, wrong with the Trump era one, why couldn't you replace it with something more quickly, at least so that we would put down a stake in the ground and not find ourselves essentially behind the European Union, which ultimately means that you're going to propose more things that are their standard. Isn't that correct?
Well, I appreciate that question. I deeply...
I wouldn't appreciate it. It's not intended to be that appreciated.
I do, because this is just something that we have discussed often, frequently. I meet with Kathy Vidal, who's the director of the...
As do I, but the question is, why didn't you... first of all, let me make it two-part. The absence of a standard does put us at a disadvantage to Europe that's moving forward, correct? In fairness, or in those discussions?
I can't say that it does.
Okay, so you won't answer or can't answer that. The second one is, why wasn't there at least some comment at the point that one was eliminated about where we should go? If you knew what was wrong with Trump, did Biden know what was right?
So we did not, the 2019, thank you, replaced the 2014. We did not reinstate either. So right now there is no policy statement coming out of the USPTO and NIST.
Well, I look forward to, you have a draft now that we're looking at, but I look forward to some real guidance. I'm deeply concerned that it's already a difficult area that Ms. Lofgren and all of us who serve on the courts committee over in Judiciary are very concerned with. Let me move on to the other one that was brought up. Somewhere I saw $150 million as an estimate for what mandatory daycare is going to cost. Is that a reasonable figure, or would you have an alternate?
I don't have a figure.
Okay, but it costs something.
I don't have any figures for you, I'm sorry.
What I want to know is, where in the four squares did Congress say that you should drive up the cost by having your standards of what you think is fair for construction? We're not talking even about factories. We're talking about during construction.
So we are following all legal authorities that we have received, and based on the statements of interest that we've received from companies, we don't see any hesitation based on the requirements.
Sure, if you're giving me money and telling me I have to do it, you're going to say, yes, sir, 3 bags full. So again, this drives up the cost. Now, we could drive up the cost. You know, every time somebody takes in a foster child, we can give them 6 months off with pay during construction. Every time somebody thinks they have COVID without a test, we should have them stay home for 14 days. We could have a whole list of them. What I want to know is, you said that under the CHIPS Act, your job was to protect the taxpayers' money, the massive amount that was given. Do you believe you're protecting it by adding these additional mandates?
I do, because holistically, what this is doing is helping us holistically to create the workforce that we need in order to respond to the demand.
A construction workforce mandates certain things which drive up the cost of production of that infrastructure, and you're saying that maintains the workforce, but that's not the workforce for CHIPS. That's the workforce for construction. But even if it was the CHIPS portion, where in the four squares of this legislation, if anywhere, do you find that mandate? Not do you have other authorities. Where do you find the mandate or intent by Congress?
Our number one goal, is to make sure that we bring manufacturing back to the United States.
I appreciate that. My time has expired, but that wasn't responsive. Responsive would have been, I don't find it in the four squares, but we had authority, so we did it. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Caston, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas, and thank you, Director, for being here today. So I want to lead in by saying that my questions go well beyond the jurisdiction of this committee and maybe beyond your expertise, so just stay with me here.
Thank you.
So as we think about any world where we are going to price greenhouse gas emissions, and whether that's, you know, at the extreme, an economy-wide cap and trade, some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle in the Senate are talking about border tax adjustments, the White House is talking about social cost of carbon. We need to quantify greenhouse gas emissions at a very quantifiable level that's, you know, a specific number of tons at a specific location that can be tied to a specific activity. There's two pieces of your budget that I'd like to understand to what degree they contribute to that. The first is you've got this, I think it's a $2 million increase to measure essentially negative CO2 actions. The work we've done in the agriculture space is we've done some stuff on the Cover Act to incentivize the use of cover crops. And we've gotten intellectually comfortable with practice-based legislation that says we're confident that X is going to reduce CO2. We're not confident how much. We don't know how durable it is, how long it's going to stay in the ground. As you look at what you're hoping to do with that expansion, is that going to enable us to actually specifically say we know there was this much CO2 reduced at this point by this action and it is durable? And I don't say this as a judgment, or is this really more about monitoring so we can, you know, understand global balances, which is also valuable. I'm not saying that as one is better than the other, but how should we understand what we can do if you succeed with that part of your budget?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So right now, a lot of the work that we've done is really to look at various ways to capture carbon, and through man-made through technology development, and we do intend to expand that. Now, to natural sources, right? So exactly what you're talking about. That's the point of the new funding that we'll be expending in the future if we get the budget. There really be two ways that we'll focus. One is in the development of calibration methods, and one is in the development of standards to support better point measurements at site.
Okay.
But
would it get to the durability question, though?
You know, I'm going to have to get back to you on that if you don't mind. I would like to answer that question. I honestly can't.
I mean, just as a personal matter, like I'm intrigued by how much carbon we could store in our soils, but it's hard for me to say if we pull it into the soil, is there going to be a flood next year? Is there going to be a fire? Is there going to be erosion?
So in theory, we should be able to get to the durability question with the proposed work. But I want to be sure that I'm answering that correctly and make sure that we can get to the proposed solution for you.
Okay, let me shift, and it's the same category of question, but on the methane side. You're talking about these processes of frequency combs, if I understand the term right, of using some electromagnetic spectrum data to figure out where the methane emissions are. We've got talks about methane fees and pricing, and obviously the gas industry is keen to reduce leaks because fewer leaks means they can sell more gas.
Right.
The challenge has always been, what do you do on assets that are either upstream of where a commercial entity has a meter, or abandoned wells that are leaking and nobody has title to it anymore, and it's just left on the taxpayer or society to bear the cost of that. Will the improvements that you can do in methane metering give us the ability to not only ascribe the location in space, but also in time, sufficient for us to say, this entity is responsible for this ton of methane, and in some methane fee, we can now connect the accounting? Or again, is that more broadly geospatial data?
No, I believe so with distributed sensing. So the optical frequency combs is a technology that has been developed by NIST for many decades as well, and a subject of a Nobel Prize. And so
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It is a continuous continuous stream of pulses of different frequencies that allow you to then use that to detect the absorption of various molecules of the different frequencies of light. So it's kind of like a fingerprint of the different molecules that are present. But depending on how you distribute that and do the measurements, I don't know the accuracy with which we would be able to pinpoint, but I can also find that out for you.
Okay. Well, and I know we're out of time, but I'm thinking, if we can get to a collection area and say, there's been a bunch of commercial entities happening here,
Right.
and now we have a cloud of
So
methane.
where's
Can
the
we
source?
tie that
Exactly.
back,
Yeah.
right? Because that's a lot of the methane system. Out of time. Thank you. Yield
Gentleman's
back.
time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Caravarro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Ranking Member Lofgren as well for the hearing today. Thank you, Dr. Lucascio, for taking the time to speak with us today. I'm particularly excited, as Mr. Collins mentioned earlier, about a hearing that we are about today's hearing, because later this week we will be voting on the bill that we have both worked on regarding the work that NIST can do around new methods and partnerships to make it easier and faster to detect drugs containing xylazine and other novel synthetic opioids. So as kind of a follow-up to the questions that he asked earlier, you discussed the research that you can do in the detection and testing of these new substances. How do you go about disseminating that information, for example, to law enforcement agencies in order to keep our law enforcement officers and others involved in the testing of these and handling of these substances safe?
Yeah, so I appreciate that question. We work directly with states, but we also disseminate our information through publications, so people understand everything that we know. When we find it out, we can disseminate that throughout the network.
Wonderful, I very much appreciate that work. Is there anything else that Congress can do to further help your actions around these efforts?
Well, thank you for that question. This is work that we have been doing sort of quietly, I think, behind the scenes for a very long time, but really contributing to public health. And as we know, we're in a horrible time of crisis with regard to not only opioids, but now fentanyl and tranq and multiple other things that are coming on the scene. I think we will always be chasing the next thing. So we always have to be ahead of the game in our understanding of what's appearing in our street drugs. Support for that program at NIST, I think, is really important moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, and I am fully committed to anything that you all need in order for us to kind of stop chasing our tails and provide you with funds and other resources to make sure that we're keeping ahead of what is going onto the streets and affecting our families. I would be interested in helping you with. In a much different vein, I am a pediatrician, and so I'm very interested both in children and their education and making sure that we are attracting as many people as possible in the future to science-based, STEM-based careers. And so I know that you have a significant presence in Colorado in particular, where I'm from, and I'm very interested in you telling us more ways about how you support K through 12 students, especially in terms of diversity, both in terms of backgrounds, myself being a Latina, but also I represent a very rural district, and so geographic diversity is also very important to me.
This has been a passion of mine, I think, since I began researching at NIST, to really promote diversity in all the research that we do is so important, because that's how we get to the best creative solutions. And that's just full stop on that, right? So a lot of our programs are geared toward, especially our newer programs, are geared toward making sure we're recruiting from diverse populations. And not only that, reaching back further and further to make sure that people, that everyone is interested in science who has that predisposition and who want, and open their eyes to science and welcome them into the science and technology back as a discipline moving forward. So a few of the things that we do for the K through 12 is we educate teachers and middle school science teachers to try to make it more interesting to engage diverse populations in the sciences. And so we teach them new types of experiments that might be appealing to younger students to make them attracted, to help them, help bring them into the science fields. But we have a number of other programs. We have a lot of outreach to our local communities to engage to engage students in science and technology.
Great. Well, I'm very appreciative of those programs. Also looking forward to supporting your efforts in that. Thank you for the work that you do. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back my time.
Gentlelady's time is yield back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Kane, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Lucascio. In New Jersey, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program has provided essential support to manufacturers, helping them enhance efficiency, cut costs, and adopt new technologies. With the program's importance in mind, many are curious about how the President's budget will back that. How does the President's budget request support the goals and the strategies outlined in the Manufacturing Extension Partnership 2023 to 2027 strategic plan?
So it will be very, very clear. Thank you for that question. It will be very clearly focused on supply chain vulnerabilities, also workforce development, which we've talked about a number of times here today, and also on really helping manufacturers innovate. So bringing new types of technological solutions into their current thinking. And the programs will be focused clearly on those 3 areas.
Could you discuss some specific ideas that you have for the U.S. to broaden participation in the development of a strong and geographically diverse STEM workforce?
So thank you for that question. It is something that I'm really passionate about. There are a number of things that we are working on at NIST, including trying to recruit and retain diverse representation into the NIST workforce. I think we have a way to go. But I think we need to do that internally first, and that's one of the things that we're working on. Now, nationally, I think we can be and become a place that is much more active in reaching out to different organizations to help diversify the STEM workforce, and we are engaging in those programs now.
Okay. And then the European Union AI Act is advancing quickly, and it contains many provisions regulating risk assessment, setting technical standards, and other activities within the NIST's purview. How has NIST engaged with your European counterparts during their process, and how should the U.S. respond to the EU's efforts?
So we are engaged internationally with the AI RMF framework. First of all, we have engaged early and often in the development of the AI RMF framework with our international partners. Our goal is to make sure that this becomes the way that people want to look at AI, responsible AI globally. So a number of different ways that we're actively engaged on the international level, especially in Europe. The TTC, the EU Tech and Trade Council. We have activities in responsible AI specifically, where discussions are ongoing about responsible AI. I think that's probably the primary focal point of our discussions with the AI RMF with the EU. The second way is through one of the NIST people who was actually behind the AI RMF. She actually testified recently, Elham Tabasi. She is a co-chair on the OECD working group that is engaged in AI more broadly, responsible AI. And so we are out there really seeking to make sure we can harmonize with what's going on globally, actively engaged in that.
Thank you, Dr. Lucascio. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Mullen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Doctor, for your testimony. My district is the birthplace and epicenter of biotechnology, the life sciences. We've got a major hub, over 300 companies there. And I am new to the Congress, new to this committee, and candidly, I wasn't aware of NIST until preparing for this hearing. So if you might be able to educate me on how the agency interacts with the life sciences industry specifically, how does the work of your agency support and further the innovation economy, and maybe a little bit on just the challenges of that public-private relationship and interaction. Would be curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And we have a number of ways that we interact with the life sciences community. One, we develop standards, and let me just I'll put this in the way that makes it more interesting perhaps, and consortia around the development of standards. So several years ago, we developed the Gene Editing Consortium, and there is engagement of all the major companies who are involved in gene editing. Our goal is to make sure that when you're editing the genome, you know what you did, right? You know what you did, and you know how to anticipate the outcome. I think that's a really critical role for NIST. We are not in the discovery area, right? That's what the life sciences, the biotech community is doing. They're in the discovery area. We're here to ensure that what they're doing, they've got a handle on understanding the changes that they make, or how the product works, or the quality of the product. So we also have standards around antibody-based therapeutics, which were important during COVID, but they're important for many, many, many different diseases. And those are to make sure that they understand the quality of their antibody-based therapeutic. So it's around standards and consortium that can help bring quality to the products.
Thank you for that. And switching gears to a different topic, we're hearing a lot about extreme weather events and climate resilience. We in California, that is certainly top of mind. And I understand that the agency is working on building more resilient communities. There are community resilience standards that the agency has put out, which are targeted toward governments and community level planning projects, flood control systems, that kind of thing. Meanwhile, I'm concerned about individual homeowners who are on their own having to take action to make their properties more resilient. Many communities are putting the onus on households to adapt their own property to withstand climate change and extreme weather. They're having to sort of go it alone right now. So I'm just curious if beyond that community level guidance, is NIST planning any work around developing standards directly applicable to individual homeowners and sort of hardening their property, making their own buildings more resilient, or is that really the realm of other entities or individuals on their own to deal with? Curious if you're looking at that.
Well, thank you for that. You know, the work that we do when we do when we do incident response, or when we do response and investigation of disasters, is really geared toward an understanding of how to really make buildings more secure and resilient. And so, I mean, that includes housing. in these areas. And so the way that we disseminate that gets disseminated into building codes and standards to help build more resilient housing for people, help build more resilient businesses. So it's not just, it doesn't leave out the people. It's really focused on how can we make sure that anything that we're learning from our investigations gets translated into buildings and codes and standards that make people's lives more secure.
Great. Thank you for that, Doctor. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas and Ranking Member Lofgren, for holding this hearing. Thank you, Dr. Lucascio, for your public service. I'd like to ask you about their risk management framework for artificial intelligence. I first of all want to commend NIST for coming out with this framework in January of this year. Their framework has at its core sort of 4 steps, right? Govern, map, measure, and manage. And then there's standards and guidance within each of those steps. I think it's a good framework. I'm wondering what has the feedback been to NIST from the stakeholders?
I appreciate that question. We've had incredible response from the stakeholders. Really good response from both large and small business community in the United States. And I'll also say that, that the NAIAC, the National AI Advisory Board, committee, has recently also recommended the adoption of the AI risk management framework more broadly.
Thank you. Have the federal agencies adopted this framework?
The federal agencies, I don't know the extent to which federal agencies or industry has adopted the framework yet. I know that a lot of people are considering the adoption and working on the adoption of the framework.
Okay.
I haven't seen
Now,
sort of the official, adoption.
NIST spent a lot of time on this, met with a lot of people, had a lot of iterations, had lots of stakeholder meetings. Why is OMB now going to reinvent the wheel and do guidance to federal agencies? Why not just have federal agencies just adopt the framework that you had all these meetings and stakeholder input on?
I can't speak for OMB, but I will say that they have asked for our input. So that's.
But I'm just what is the thinking there? You spend all these resources developing this framework. OMB doesn't have the time to do their own thing. Why are they reinventing the wheel? I don't get it. I'm just trying to understand what the thinking is there. What's the reason we don't just have every federal agency adopt the framework you all put out?
I really can't speak to that. I don't.
All right, so I
But I
think
can say
NIST
that
should
the White
ask that question, and I would like a response to that question, because I don't think reinventing the wheel makes a lot of sense, and unless it's somehow that the administration doesn't believe in your framework, but from what you're telling me, I think it got good feedback. It seems like it is a good framework, so I'm just curious. I don't really understand that process. All right, so after you release your framework, in March, OpenAI released the second version of ChatGPT, GPT-4. It's generative AI. It's sort of another advancement in artificial intelligence. By the way, I'm a recovering computer science major, so all of this is enthralling to me. I find it amazing. I think AI is going to provide us a lot of benefits. It can also harm us. Does NIST have the resources and budget to deal with what we're seeing is increasing usage and increasing development of AI as you come up with, for example, framework version 2.0?
So I will say that the money that we are asking for AI, first of all, I'll just go back and mention that we do have administration support from the administration for the AI RMF. But I'll mention that the money that we're asking for AI in the coming year, in FY24, is really going to be focused on generative AI. It's going to be focused on, part of it is going to be focused on taking the AI RMF framework and looking at that as a use case, working with the community, working with public engagement, and understanding and uncovering the risks associated specifically with generative AI. I think there are a number of things that we want to do in that area, and that will be part of the focus of the future of the next year's funds.
Do you have a timeline for when that framework might come out?
Well, it will be based on the AIRMF framework, so it won't be independent framework. It will be an application of the framework to generative AI.
Okay, got it.
Working with the community, very closely with the community, as we always do. So.
Great. Thank you. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Sykes, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Lucascio, for being here with us. I hope I'm your last question today, as you've been here for quite some time. But I do want to talk to you or get your feedback and expertise on CHIPS and Science Act. I'm from Ohio. Obviously, the CHIPS and Science Act is really integral to our economy and our future. And over the last couple of weeks, I've asked many of our witnesses who have testified, including the National Science Foundation, about what would happen to their budget, their continued expertise, and opportunities for expansion and growth around technology if the majority's budget bill were to pass. And one of the things he shared was there'd be about 280,000 semiconductor jobs that would be lost across the country. Obviously, that would be a significant impact for not only Ohio, but the entire country, our supply chains, and our national defense, our security and competitiveness with the world. But wanted to just hear your take on that as well, whether or not you agree with, you may not exactly have that number, but whether or not you agree with those devastating impacts and what that could do to the semiconductor industry in this country.
I do think there will be devastating impacts, and I think that's agreed upon, that there will be, it is not a time to take our foot off the gas in terms of competing in the technological landscape globally, because if we do, other countries will gladly take over. So this is the time to invest in science and technology and not lose ground in science and technology. We already, by a lot of estimates, we're already falling behind because they are investing in research and we're investing in standards and investing in multiple areas that are in manufacturing. As a matter of fact, China has mimicked our Manufacturing USA institutes as well. So it's really not time to take our foot off the gas, and I do think we'll lose a lot of ground in terms of our global economic competitiveness if we do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I can say with some confidence our colleagues from both sides of the aisle have been strong supporters of the CHIPS Act, and I would certainly hate for us to lose our competitive advantage as well as our economic opportunities in Ohio and across the country. And I know that your agency is doing quite a bit of work. There's your CHIPS office in Northeast Ohio. Love to come visit and see what you're doing. But if you could focus a bit more about, or share with me a bit more about, if I were to go visit, what would I see there? What are some of the things that you're doing, particularly with the Manufacturing USA Institute, and ensuring that you have the workforce, you have the infrastructure necessary to produce the semiconductors and live up to the full potential of the CHIPS and Science Act?
So there's so many moving parts right now within the CHIPS and Science Act and its implementation, including notice of funding opportunities that I think everyone is aware of, and how that's going to lead to the increased capacity for building and manufacturing in this country. And we are so excited about that and working very, very hard on implementing that. At the same time, we are very excited about the implementation of the CHIPS R&D funding, which will, so the manufacturing incentives are to bring manufacturing back to the United States. The R&D incentives are to keep it here because we are the innovators in the world, and we can't be beat. Both of those are really underpinned by a tremendous workforce development piece because of the demand, 180,000 new jobs created. We have to be able to support that. Otherwise, we lose both. We will lose manufacturing and we will lose R&D, and we can't.
Thank you, Doctor. I yield back and hopefully give you a minute back of your time.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Seeing no one else seeking recognition, I want to thank the doctor for her valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The record will remain open for 10 additional days for comments and written questions from members. This hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.